Let's turn to a different subject. You know, you and I have been working for several years on the issues of so-called gun control laws. In light of what you've been saying today, how should Americans view so-called gun control laws?
First thing we observe is gun control laws do not protect life, liberty, or property. And remember, the Declaration of Independence talked about protecting the rights of man, unalienable rights to life and liberty, and the things that support that. Well, gun control laws don't do that. Gun control laws don't keep the peace. They don't help protect innocent people against aggressors. Let's look at today, for example, in Louisiana, down in the flooded areas. Now they've apparently suspended the concealed carry laws. They're apparently going house to house to retrieve firearms from people under some notion of gun control. Nobody can show you any evidence that taking away a firearm from somebody who's only going to use that for defense is a good thing. What it means is the bad guys who are not going to be disarmed are going to be armed, while all the innocent people stuck down there in the water are going to be disarmed, and the government is making that happen. That's what gun control laws do generally. And then on a larger scale, gun control laws are a key element of every genocide of which I'm aware in the 20th century. Gun control laws condition the people to consider themselves powerless subjects. You know, they're waiting for the state or waiting for the city or waiting for somebody to take care of them because their tools have been taken away. And, for example, if the New Orleans Police Department or the National Guard can't protect you, you're lost under a gun control notion where they've made sure you can't protect yourself. So I look at gun control laws as simply bad. And not only bad, they're also unconstitutional if you can read the Constitution, if you can read the Second Amendment, the Ninth and Tenth Amendments, and the Bill of Rights. Gun control laws are bad laws.
Well, just to clear the air, in case anybody has any doubts at this point, are there any kinds of so-called gun control laws that you favor?
No, Aaron, I do not. I oppose all gun control laws. What I do favor, though, are laws that punish criminal violence and misconduct. Everybody does, I think, except the bad guys. So, but that's where the real action is in protecting society, is to protect the peace and punish bad guys who actually commit violent crimes. I also favor laws that forbid convicted violent criminals, and I say violent criminals, from possessing and carrying firearms. Now some people call that a gun control law, but it's not a gun control law. What that is a law that imposes an additional penalty upon people who have proved that they're willing to use force to harm other people unjustly. So the prohibition on convicted criminals, as I say, is not a gun control law. It's a penalty for past conduct. I can also accept laws that would set an age limit on the lawful carrying of firearms. For example, you might have a rule against young kids walking around with firearms without permission. But again, the way I would phrase it, such a law would be to punish a parent who allowed a child access to firearms when that child committed an illegal violent act. That's not a gun control law. It's not aimed at the gun. It's a parental responsibility law. It aims at the parent. So those are the kinds of laws that I think make sense because they aim at the actor, not at the tool.
Well, a lot of Americans oppose so-called gun control laws and policies. But I think the big question is, where should they focus their energies? For example, electing different congressmen and senators, getting different judges in the courts, trying to get initiatives passed by the voters in the states, lobbying Congress and state legislators to change the laws. What would you suggest Americans do?
Well, all of those efforts can be useful, but I strongly believe that the American people have to understand gun control laws, so-called gun control laws, for what they are, and they are civilian disarmament laws. We have to understand that gun control is an idea. When you analyze it and look at it the way it's designed and the way its effects operate, it's designed to maximize the power in the hands of governments and government agents, while it leaves civilians powerless and dependent upon government. And that's why, incidentally, the leftist philosophy tends to favor gun control. The left, as a philosophical vision, sees a world run by experts. That's the vision they would like to have in the future. Experts who exercise power to get ordinary people to live according to the way the experts think is best. Now, history of mankind shows that vision leads to all the horrors of authoritarian and totalitarian regimes. But that's what's happening with gun control. So Americans have to understand gun control is a form of oppression. In fact, we have to come to a point where we hate and fear gun control ideas the same way we would hate and fear the vicious ideas of racism or Nazism, communism, and those others. Look at it this way. A person who wants to disarm you when you're facing a dangerous enemy is a person whom you should hate the same way you would hate a rapist or a child murderer. So, answering your original question, the most important effort, I believe, is to move the hearts and minds of the American people. Move them to understand what I'm talking about and the danger of gun control as an idea and as a series of laws. And when Americans understand, it'll be a lot easier to change the laws or elect better representatives or get good rulings from the courts.
This is Talkin' to America with our guest, Richard Stevens. Here once again is your host, Aaron Zellman.
You know, one of the projects that you've been helping JPFO with, that some people have challenged us on, is to examine the gun control laws in Nazi Germany. JPFO has argued that in Nazi Germany, the gun control laws were used to disarm the intended victims of genocide. So the first question we should address is that historical claim true?
Yes, that historical claim is true. And when you look back at some of the history that's been unearthed over the last three-quarters of a century, you learn that the Nazis began disarming and imprisoning its political enemies in 1933, just after Hitler came to power. They began that. There are news stories in the New York Times, for example, that reported some of the raids and arrests that were already starting to occur. Dr. Stephen Halbrook, a lot of people have heard of him. Stephen Halbrook has written a very comprehensive law review article that documents this fact. And a shortened version of that article, by the way, appears in our book, Death by Gun Control. And Dr. Halbrook kindly lent that chapter to our book. And it documents it with footnotes and the whole works so that you can see that the Nazi regime did indeed use gun control laws to disarm its victims. Also, of course, the JPFO book, which came out even before that, called Gun Control, Gateway to Tyranny, provides the full text of the German laws that operated in Germany at that time with English translations, analysis of the provisions. And, of course, all those books are available at the website, jpfo.org.
There's some confusion amongst people, so we ought to clarify a point. Was it Hitler who imposed gun control laws to disarm the victims?
Yeah, this is an area where people who have argued about and said, the Nazis passed laws to disarm the people. Well, in reality, the truth is, the comprehensive gun control laws that made it possible for the Nazis to disarm the people, those laws were actually enacted 5 years before the Nazis came to power. They were enacted, the comprehensive gun control law was enacted in 1928, and the 1928 laws in Germany had a national firearms registration, a national owner licensing, and lots of other controls. All of those things impaired private ownership and possession of firearms, and also alerted the regime to whoever would own a firearm, they would be on a list, so they would know at the time, sometime in the future, who had firearms and who didn't. And it's a perfect example of how the law lives on and produces bad consequences even when the original legislators are gone. The folks in 1928 might have had really good motives for their national gun control law, but they were gone in 1933, and the Nazis employed the concept of law enforcement to aggressively enforce those existing gun laws on the books, because they were on the books already from 1928, against Germans, both Jews and non-Jews. And, of course, later in the 1930s, up in 1938 in particular, Nazi laws and edicts tightened the restrictions on firearms ownership, especially by Jews.